Dear all, welcome to the class of International Economics. Today we are discussing other non-tariff trade barriers. In the last class we have discussed quota, which is an important non-tariff trade barriers, and also we have discussed what are the different types of quota system and what is the difference between tariff and quota. So here today we are checking what are the other non-tariff trade barriers. The first non-tariff trade barriers, it is voluntary export restraints, which is also known as VER. An importing country induces another nation to reduce its exports of a commodity voluntarily under the threat of higher trade restrictions. Here there is a trade restriction, but it is voluntarily imposed by a country. So if there are two countries like one importer and one exporter, this importer might go with a negotiation with the exporters to reduce their exports because it may be harmful for their own domestic industries. And also they can also negotiate with the exporter that if they are not adopting, if they are not reducing their exports, they can go with any tariff or other trade barriers. So automatically this exporter will reduce their exports voluntarily. This is known as voluntary export restraints. Okay, it also be because of the under the threat of higher trade restrictions by the importer. Like US negotiated with the Japan since 1950s to curtail its export of textiles to US. Okay, mostly developed nations are negotiating with the developing nations to curtail their exports. And you might have heard MFA, multi-fiber agreement, which is signed by 22 countries in 1973 December at Geneva. So it was existed from 1974 to 2004. Multi-fiber agreement was to reduce the export of textiles and other clothes from less developed or developing nations to the developed nations, like US and European countries were negotiating with the developing nations to reduce their exports. Okay, so the developing nations started reducing their export to these developed nations. So this is also an example of voluntary export restraints. Then there are other technical, administrative and other regulations which can be used as a trade barrier, like safety regulations. One country can impose some kind of safety regulation on their imports. Suppose some electronic items. So if they fulfill this kind of safety requirements, then only they will import. Health regulations. If some products are injurious to health, they can make some restrictions for that kind of products. Labeling requirements. The country can impose, the country can advise the exporting country to put the proper labeling about the bottle or the packet of the products. So you might have seen in all the products there will be ingredients of that product about that packet or bottle. Okay, so in the ingredients is must in most of the cases for export and import. So these are the different restrictions or regulations which will be a hindrance for free trade. Okay, this can also be a barrier for international trade. And other one is government procurement policies. The government can make a decision that they won't buy any product from abroad. Okay, for specific purpose they can buy all the domestic products, like a Swadeshi movement And also in America there is a Buy American Act in 1933. So if there is a need for government for their consumption, so they will buy the products from their own producers, from domestic producers. So that's why it is a procurement policy. So what will happen? The import will be reduced. Then there are other restrictions like foreign exchange regulations and multiple exchange rates. Government can put some kind of restrictions on foreign exchange, because the government or the central bank of a country is a custodian of foreign exchange. So they can make a decision, or they can make a regulation that they will give the foreign exchange for these purposes. Suppose that if they are not ready to give the foreign exchange for importing gold, they can make that decision. And also they can import dual or multiple exchange rates. For a particular commodities, the exchange rate will be this much, and some of the goods which is very beneficial for a country, exchange rate will be less. So they can put a regulation like that also. So these are the different technical and administrative and other regulations which is a hindrance for free trade, or barriers for free trade. Then the trade restrictions due to international cartels. Some of the countries can create a cartel or association, and they can decide the what kind of price should be adopted, what how much quantity should be supplied. So this is example of cartel. So a cartel, exactly, it is an it is an organization of suppliers of a commodity located in different nations that agrees to restrict the output and export of the commodity with the aim of maximizing the profit. So if some of the countries are deciding to restrict the output and maximize the profit, and they are making one association for that, it is known as cartel, which is also a trade barrier. If we say one example, OPEC. Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. So this is a best example for cartel. Okay, so and also you might have heard IATA, International Air Transport Association, which fixes the fare and policies of international airlines. Okay, so these are the examples for cartel. So if there is a cartel, there will be it is also a barrier for free trade. Cartels are more successful with fewer members producing an essential commodity with no close substitutes. So if few members or few countries has a one product which is common and which doesn't have much substitute, then the cartel will be more successful. Okay, but if there are some kind of substitutes for that products, it won't be successful. So OPEC which is a best example for a cartel, because petroleum there is no much substitute for petroleum, so they can it is a successful cartel, and it was founded in Baghdad, Iraq. Then agreement was happened in 1960s by namely Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi and Venezuela. Firstly these countries were the members, but later other countries also joined, like Qatar, Indonesia, Libya, UAE, Algeria, Nigeria, Ecuador, Gabon, Angola and Equatorial Guinea in 2017. So these all joined in OPEC. So what is the aim of this OPEC? To control the price of petroleum and to control the supply of petroleum in order to maximize the profits of these countries. Okay, so this is an example of a cartel. Headquarter of OPEC is in Vienna, Austria. Austria is not a member of this OPEC countries. It is interesting. Then fourthly, there are export subsidies. Export subsidies are also non-tariff trade barriers. What is export subsidies? It might be through granting of tax relief or subsidized loan for home industries to exports. It is also a part of dumping, because they will sell the product at low price abroad. But normally it is illegal by the international agreement, but also it happens through different ways. The US also giving US Export-Import Bank give low interest loans for the home industries to promote the exports. So this export subsidies and also the dumping and are important form of non-tariff trade barriers. How the dumping? What is dumping? Dumping it is an export of a commodity at below cost, or at least sale of commodity at a lower price abroad than domestically. So selling at lower price abroad than domestically. So this if one firm is monopolist, or they have monopolistic power in their own country, so they will they might have sell at higher prices in their domestic country, but international level they may sell at cheaper price. So this is known as dumping. So it may be through, they may sell a product at even below cost or lower cost than domestic. So this is known as dumping. There are different types of dumping. Firstly, persistent dumping. Okay, what is persistent dumping? Persistent itself means it is a continuous tendency of a domestic monopoly to maximize the profit. Okay, it occurs when domestic demand is inelastic and foreign demand is highly elastic. So in international market there is a high competition, that's why the demand is highly elastic. So always a monopolist they may go with persistent dumping or continuous tendency of domestic monopolist to maximize the profit. Then there is a predatory dumping. This is not a continuous tendency, but it is a temporary sale of a commodity at below cost or at lower price abroad in order to drive the foreign producers out of the business. So the main aim is to drive the foreign producers out of the business and to be a monopolist in international market. Okay, so that's why they are temporarily selling at selling the commodities at lower prices, as Jio has done in India. But it is not an international trade, but it is Indian firm only. But if it works in international market, it is known as predatory dumping or temporary purpose. Then sporadic dumping. Sporadic dumping means it is an occasional sale of a commodity. Not always. It is also an occasional sale of a commodity at below cost. To sell out the temporary surplus. So for some of the commodities or in some occasions there might be temporary surplus. There might be excess supply which is not sold out. So this excess supply or surplus can be exported to another country at a lower price. Okay, see, this kind of occasional sale might be known as sporadic dumping. Examples: Japan was accused of dumping steel and TV sets in US. So they were selling at lower price in US because of they had a huge surplus of TV sets. Then trade restriction to contract predatory dumping are justified to protect the domestic industries from unfair competition from abroad. So to control this kind of predatory dumping is normally justified because all the countries will try to protect their own domestic industries. Okay, so these are the three important dumping. Firstly, persistent dumping, then predatory dumping, sporadic dumping. Okay, but if this dumping to be successful, there are two conditions. Firstly, the producer should be a monopolist in home market. The producer should be a monopolist in the home market, and he will have there might be tough competition in international market, but he should be a monopolist in the home market, then only it is possible. Okay, then there should not be any possibility of re-exports. Suppose that in India it is a domestic, one firm is selling at high prices, but international market they are selling at lower prices, but there should not be any possibility of export that commodity from abroad to India. Okay, the prices should be the prices should not be very much different. Okay, so there should not be any possibility of re-export from the foreign nations to India. So these are the two conditions to be satisfied for a successful dumping. Then there are contingent protection. What is contingent protection? Trade barriers that are imposed if certain circumstances or contingencies are met. Then if we are imposing some kind of trade barriers, then it is known as contingent protection. What are the contingency situations? Like there is a dumping, or there is a as we said, there is a subsidies. So one country is doing dumping, or one country is giving subsidies for the domestic industries. To avoid this, to neutralize the effect of the subsidies, to neutralize the effect of dumping, one country can impose some kind of trade restrictions. Okay, that is known as contingent protection. Examples are anti-dumping or countervailing duties can be imposed. We have already explained what is anti-dumping duty. It is also a part of tariff barriers because it is also a duty or a tax. So through these taxes, anti-dumping tariff or anti-dumping duty or countervailing duty, so one country can neutralize the effect of subsidies or dumping. So if one country is imposing one tariff, what will happen? The price will go up. So it will neutralize the effect of subsidies or dumping. Okay, so these are the contingent protections. Okay, and anti-dumping duties and countervailing duties are examples of contingent protection or administrative protection. Then state trading. State can directly involve in trading. Okay, so the state is carried out the whole trade itself. So it was increased, especially after 1930s. State means country, one nation can, or the nation's government can involve directly in trading activities. So this is known as canalization. Route all the imports through the government agencies. If all the imports are through the government agencies, then it is known as canalization. In India, we have some trading corporations like State Trade Corporation (STC), Mineral and Metal Trading Corporation (MMTC), Mica Trading Corporation of India (MITCA). So these are the different trade organizations which is controlled by the government. So if the government is controlling the trade directly, so this is also one form of trade barrier. So it won't allow free trade. Then import embargo. What is import embargo? Restrict the import from one country. When a country bans the import of certain or all goods from another country, it is known as import embargo. There are few examples in front of us. US and other developed nations put import embargoes against both Iraq and Kuwait during the Gulf War. And recently, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Egypt imposed an embargo against Qatar because of they said that they are promoting terrorism and all. So it was happened 2017. Now in January 2021, and now the trade has been open with Qatar. So these are the import embargoes. So these are the different non-tariff trade barriers. Okay, so you should understand that the most important non-tariff trade barriers which is adopted by most of the countries is quota system. But there are few other non-tariff trade barriers that we have discussed now. Thank you for listening me. Thank you all.